Have you ever had a moment when the floor seemed to drop out from beneath you? When one sentence, spoken casually, changed the way you saw everything? That's exactly what happened to me the night I asked a simple question. When's the wedding? It was a warm evening in my home, the kind of night that usually feels comforting. My kitchen was filled with the familiar smell of roasted chicken and rosemary potatoes. I had polished the table, laid out my favorite china, and even lit candles, because this wasn't just any dinner. This was dinner with my son, Jason, and his fiancée, Sophia. Jason, my only child, had always been my pride. At 28, he was independent, thoughtful, the kind of man who still called me just to check in. And Sophia, well, Sophia was the woman he had chosen. She was beautiful, sharp, and ambitious, though I'd be lying if I said I hadn't noticed the subtle arrogance in her tone at times. Still, I had told myself to embrace her because love meant making space for the people our children choose. That night, as we sat around the table, the laughter felt a little forced, the conversation a little too polished. I brushed it aside at first, pouring glasses of wine, cutting slices of bread, reminding myself that I was lucky they were here at all. And then I asked it, the question that had been burning in me for months. So, I said, looking directly at Jason with a smile I could barely contain, when's the wedding? The words seemed to hang in the air, floating above the clink of cutlery. Jason froze, his fork halfway to his plate. He gave a small nervous cough, avoiding my eyes. Before I could press him, Sophia leaned back in her chair, a smirk playing on her lips. Oh, she said lightly, as if she were commenting on the weather. We already got married, yesterday. The world tilted. I blinked, waiting for the punchline, but none came. My son shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting to the tablecloth. Sophia, on the other hand, looked directly at me, as if savoring my silence. I finally found my voice. Married? Yesterday? Yes. Sophia replied, swirling her wine with deliberate calm. We decided to keep it simple. No fuss, no drama, just the two of us. It was modern. Her tone was almost mocking, as if tradition itself were something to laugh at. My chest tightened, 1,000 questions pressing at once. Why hadn't I been told? Why hadn't I been invited? I had dreamed for years of standing beside my son on his wedding day, watching him make vows, welcoming his bride into our family. And now that moment had been stolen from me with a single smirk. Jason finally spoke, his voice low. Mom, we didn't want it to be a big deal. We thought this would be easier for everyone. Easier for everyone. The word stabbed deeper than I expected. Easier for who? For him? For Sophia? Certainly not for me. I forced myself to breathe. I see, I managed, though my throat felt dry. So it was just the two of you? Sophia smiled wider. Exactly. Intimate, private, perfect. Perfect. My hands trembled beneath the table, but I hid them under the napkin. I could feel something unspoken in the room, something tense and fragile. Jason wouldn't look at me, his gaze fixed firmly on his plate. That's when I noticed it. Every time Sophia spoke, Jason's eyes dropped. He avoided her gaze, as if her words carried more weight than he could bear. It wasn't just guilt, it was something else. A heaviness in his posture, a quiet plea I couldn't quite name. Still, Sophia filled the silence as though she enjoyed each second of my discomfort. Honestly, Audrey, she said, tilting her head, you should be happy for us. It's the future, isn't it? Weddings don't have to be parades of relatives and expenses anymore. We kept it efficient. Efficient. Was that what marriage meant to her? My heart ached as I studied Jason's face. This wasn't how he'd been raised. He had once talked about wanting a garden ceremony, about dancing under fairy lights, about inviting the family who had watched him grow. Now, all of that had vanished overnight, replaced by Sophia's clipped, cold definition of love. I tried to swallow my anger, but it simmered beneath the surface. I wasn't just excluded. I was dismissed, discarded, as though my role in his life had been overwritten in a single stroke. Sophia reached across the table, touching Jason's hand with an exaggerated show of affection. We don't need anyone's approval, right, darling? Jason flinched. So subtle most people would have missed it. But I didn't. I caught it, the same way I caught the slight tremor in his hand when he pulled it back. Something was wrong. I leaned back in my chair, my smile frozen in place. On the outside I appeared calm, but inside, my mind was racing. Why the secrecy? Why the sudden rush? Why did my son look like a man carrying a burden too heavy for him to speak about? Sophia's smirk told me she enjoyed holding the power in that moment. She had orchestrated this, and I had been blindsided. But Jason's silence told a different story, one I was determined to uncover. Dinner limped on, though no one really ate. My food grew cold as I listened to Sophia ramble about modern love and breaking tradition, while Jason sat quietly, shrinking into himself. I forced small smiles, nodding at the right moments, all the while studying the two of them like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. When the plates were cleared and the evening drew to a close, I hugged Jason goodbye a little longer than usual. His embrace was stiff, his body tense. Sophia stood nearby, her eyes glinting with a strange satisfaction, as though she had won something I didn't even know we were competing for. As their car pulled away, I stood at the window, my hands gripping the curtains. My heart was heavy, but beneath the ache was something sharper. Resolve. They thought they had closed the door on me, that the story was finished. But I knew better. My son was hiding something, and I wasn't about to let him drown in silence. Whatever secret lurked behind Sophia's smirk and Jason's downcast eyes, I was going to find it. Because a mother knows when something is wrong. And this marriage, it wasn't just a private affair. It was a warning bell. And little did I know, the truth was far darker than I could have imagined. A few days later, I decided to pay them a visit. But I didn't go as the suspicious mother prying into her son's life. No, I arrived at their apartment with a bright smile and a wrapped package in my hands. A wedding gift, I said, when Sophia opened the door. Her eyes flickered with surprise, just for a second, before she slipped back into her usual polished composure. How thoughtful, she replied, stepping aside. Do come in. The moment I entered, I could feel it. This wasn't Jason's home. It was hers. The apartment was elegant, almost sterile. Marble counters, sleek furniture, walls lined with abstract art that screamed of money and control. Not a photo of Jason as a child, not a trace of his old guitar, not even the cozy books he used to collect. Every corner felt curated, as if Sophia had carefully erased his presence and replaced it with her own. Jason appeared from the kitchen, smiling faintly, but I could see the fatigue in his eyes. He hugged me quickly, then stepped back, hands shoved into his pockets. I thought I'd bring something to celebrate, I said, setting the gift on the coffee table. You didn't let me be part of the wedding, so this is my small way of catching up. Sophia poured tea, her movements sharp and controlled, and we sat together. I tried to draw Jason into conversation, but Sophia dominated every topic, her voice smooth but laced with something sharper. Ownership. Oh, I've already updated everything with my new last name, she boasted, flashing her ring. It feels so empowering being officially tied to Jason. And of course, we'll be reorganizing our finances together. We don't believe in secrets, do we, darling? She glanced at him with that same sly smile. Jason gave a weak nod, but his hand went straight to his wedding ring, twisting it nervously. I noticed it immediately, the restless fidgeting, the way his answers came short and clipped, as if he were walking on a tightrope. Sophia leaned closer to me. And you know, Audrey, marriage isn't just about love. It's about practicality, too. That's why we decided to make it official so quickly. Practical reasons, you see. The words slipped out so smoothly, so naturally, she didn't even realize what she had said. But the moment they left her mouth, I saw it, the flicker of awareness in her eyes. She laughed lightly, brushing it off. Of course, love too. We're very much in love. But I wasn't fooled. I sipped my tea slowly, my heart pounding. Practical reasons? What could be more practical than love, commitment, family? What exactly had driven this marriage forward in such secrecy? The tension grew heavier as the minutes ticked by. Jason tried to smile, tried to ask about the neighbors, my garden, anything to change the subject. But every time Sophia spoke, his shoulders stiffened, his voice trailed off. At one point, she excused herself to fetch more sugar from the kitchen. The moment she disappeared, the air shifted. Jason exhaled shakily, as though he'd been holding his breath the entire visit. Jason, I whispered, leaning toward him. Are you all right? He avoided my eyes, his hand gripping the edge of the sofa. I'm fine, Mom, really. But I didn't believe him, not for a second. I set my teacup down, and that's when I saw it. On the side table, half covered by a magazine, was a stack of papers. My fingers itched. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it wasn't polite. But something inside me, the same instinct that had carried me through motherhood, the same voice that warned me when Jason was lying as a boy, told me to look. Quietly, I slid the top paper free. My heart lurched. It was a marriage certificate. Jason and Sophia's. At first, nothing seemed unusual until I noticed the dates. The certificate had been signed weeks ago, long before Sophia claimed they were married yesterday. Why lie? Why pretend? My eyes scanned the page, tracing the signatures, the official stamps. Everything looked legitimate, but the timeline was wrong. Either they had forged something, or someone had wanted to rewrite the truth. Just then, I heard footsteps returning. My pulse raced. I slipped the paper back under the magazine just as Sophia re-entered, her eyes flicking between Jason and me with sharp suspicion. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice sweet but edged with steel. I smiled too quickly. "Of course, just admiring how beautifully you've decorated the place." Her lips curved, but her gaze lingered on me a beat too long. It was as if she could sense that I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. The rest of the visit passed in strained politeness. Sophia carried the conversation, Jason withdrew deeper into silence, and I forced my face into calm composure while my mind reeled. When I finally stood to leave, Sophia hugged me with surprising firmness, whispering, "We'll see you soon, Audrey." It wasn't a promise. It was a warning. As I stepped out into the evening air, clutching my purse like a lifeline, one thought echoed louder than the rest. This marriage wasn't built on love. It was built on something darker, something hidden, and the forged dates on that certificate were the first crack in the facade. I didn't know what the truth was yet, but I was certain of one thing. Sophia was playing a dangerous game, and Jason was caught in the middle. After that visit to Jason and Sophia's apartment, I couldn't sleep. The image of that marriage certificate haunted me. The dates didn't match, the signatures seemed forced, and the entire story Sophia had spun was beginning to unravel. I knew I couldn't face this alone. So the next morning, I called the one person who had always stood by me, my oldest friend, Helen. Helen and I had known each other since we were girls. She was the kind of woman who could spot a lie from a mile away, with a laugh that could cut through any storm. When I told her what had happened, her tone shifted from sympathy to sharp determination. "Audrey," she said firmly, "this isn't just about being excluded from a wedding. Something's off. You need to dig deeper." At first, I hesitated. What mother wants to admit that her son might be trapped in something dangerous? But the memory of Jason's downcast eyes, his restless hands, and Sophia's slip about practical reasons hardened my resolve. So Helen and I began our quiet investigation. We started with what we knew. Sophia. She had appeared out of nowhere, dazzling Jason, pulling him into her orbit with frightening speed. But who was she, really? Helen was the one who first uncovered the trail. Over coffee in my kitchen, she pushed a folder across the table toward me. "Look," she whispered, as though Sophia herself might be listening through the walls. Inside were public records, articles, fragments of a past carefully buried. Sophia had been married before, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Each marriage short, each annulment abrupt, and each time she had walked away wealthier than when she entered. My stomach dropped. Jason wasn't her first victim. He was just her next. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. I needed proof. Something undeniable. That's what led me to the courthouse. The records office was quiet, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly as I approached the counter. A clerk with tired eyes greeted me. I explained I needed to review marriage records for my family history. It wasn't entirely untrue. He disappeared into the back, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. Minutes passed like hours before he returned, a thin file in hand. I opened it, and what I saw confirmed everything I feared. Yes, Sophia's license with Jason was there, but beneath it, another document caught my eye, filed just 1 month earlier, a marriage license, with a different man's name. My fingers trembled as I traced the letters. Sophia had started the process of marrying someone else, then abruptly switched it to Jason. Before I could ask, the clerk leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "That one," he said, tapping the earlier license, "was unusual." She filed it, then withdrew it almost immediately. Strange thing is, most people don't go through all that paperwork unless they're serious. I thanked him, clutching the papers like a lifeline, and left the courthouse with my heart pounding. Sophia wasn't just ambitious, she was calculating. She had lined up men like chess pieces, moving them at will, discarding one when a better option appeared. And my son had become her pawn. But the story didn't end there. That evening, as I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Jason stood there, his expression strained. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. My heart ached at the sight of him, my boy, the man I'd raised, now caught in a storm he couldn't control. He stepped inside, running a hand through his hair. "Sophia says you've been spying," he said, his voice low. "She thinks you don't trust her." I held his gaze. "Do you?" he faltered, eyes darting away. "Of course I do. She's my wife." I pulled the marriage certificate from the stack and laid it on the table between us. "Then, explain this. Why is the certificate dated weeks before you told me you got married? Why pretend it was yesterday?" Jason stared at it, his face paling. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Finally, he slumped into the chair, his hands covering his face. "She pressured me," he whispered. "She said if I didn't marry her quickly, she'd leave. She told me there were other men who wanted her, that I'd lose her forever if I didn't act." The confession cut me deeper than I expected. My son, manipulated, cornered into a marriage built on fear instead of love. "She said it was practical," he continued, his voice cracking, "that it was the smart thing to do. And he broke off, shaking his head. "I thought I was making the right choice." I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Jason, this isn't love, this is control." But before I could say more, he pulled back, guilt and confusion clouding his eyes. "I can't talk about this. Sophia will." His voice trailed off, but the fear in it was unmistakable. He stood abruptly, muttering that he had to go, leaving me alone with the damning papers and a rising tide of dread. I sat there long after he left, the weight of truth pressing down on me. Sophia had ensnared my son with manipulation, secrecy, and lies. She had nearly married another man only weeks earlier. She had forced Jason into her trap. And now she had the audacity to call me suspicious, for daring to see the truth. But if she thought I would stop there, she was gravely mistaken. Because that night, as I locked the file away in my desk, one thought burned in my mind. This wasn't just about Jason's happiness anymore. It was about protecting him from a woman who saw marriage as a transaction, not a vow. The hunt for truth had begun, and I wouldn't stop until Sophia's web of lies came crashing down. The night of the gathering arrived like the calm before a storm. My home glowed warmly under the porch lights, laughter and chatter spilling into the street as family and friends arrived for what was advertised as a belated wedding celebration. To the casual observer, it looked like a joyous reunion, a proud mother hosting a party in honor of her son and his new bride. But beneath the clinking glasses and the scent of home-cooked meals, an invisible tension curled around every corner of the house. I had planned it carefully. I wanted witnesses, people who loved Jason, people who could see the truth for themselves when the moment came. For weeks, I had wrestled with the decision. Should I confront Sophia privately? Should I wait and hope my son comes to his senses? Or should I strike hard, making sure there was no way for lies to be smoothed over later? My heart told me the answer. Protect Jason. Protect him now, before he lost everything. Inside, Jason stood stiff in the living room, wearing a suit that looked like it belonged to someone else. He smiled politely at distant relatives, accepted congratulations, and thanked everyone for coming. But I could see it. His smile never reached his eyes. He seemed like a man caught between two worlds, unable to step fully into either one. Sophia, on the other hand, thrived in the spotlight. Dressed in a sleek designer gown that hugged her figure, she floated through the room like she owned it. She greeted everyone with that sharp, rehearsed smile of hers, the kind that never softened, the kind that was more performance than warmth. She introduced herself as Mrs. Jason Whitaker, with casual pride, emphasizing the last name each time as though stamping her claim into the air. I watched her carefully. Every laugh, every gesture, every word Sophia spoke was calculated. And I knew tonight was the night to unravel it all. The dinner went smoothly enough. Guests shared memories, raised glasses, and offered blessings for the newlyweds. I stayed composed, my heart pounding louder with each passing toast. I waited until the moment was right, until Sophia was comfortable, basking in her victory, certain she had won the family's acceptance. And then I rose from my chair. I lifted my glass, smiling politely, my voice steady as I began. First, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Family means everything to me, and celebrating Jason's happiness should be the most beautiful occasion of all. But as a mother, I believe love isn't just about smiles and photographs. It's about truth. And truth, no matter how uncomfortable, has a way of finding the light. The room grew still. Conversations hushed. Even the sound of forks against plates faded, as all eyes turned to me. Jason looked uneasy, shifting in his seat. Sophia raised a perfectly arched brow, sipping her wine with deliberate calm. I set my glass down, my next words slicing through the silence. I want to speak about this marriage, because something doesn't add up. I reached into a folder I had kept tucked beneath my chair. The papers felt heavy in my hand, not just in weight, but in meaning. I laid the first document on the table, the marriage certificate. This certificate, I said, holding it up for the room to see, was filed with dates that don't align, signed weeks before the supposed ceremony, forged details, inconsistencies too glaring to ignore. A ripple of murmurs swept across the room. Guests leaned closer, whispering to one another. Jason's face paled. He looked between me and his wife, confusion and dread etching lines into his features. Sophia let out a short laugh, her voice dripping with disdain. Audrey, really? Are we doing this tonight? It's embarrassing for you. Dates get mixed up all the time in paperwork, clerical errors, nothing more. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out more papers. Except it's not just one error. Sophia, you've been married before, multiple times, each ending abruptly, each leaving you financially better off than when you began. A trail of annulments, settlements, and vanished spouses. The crowd gasped, heads turned sharply toward Sophia, whose practiced smile flickered for the first time. That's absurd, she said quickly, her voice tight. You've been digging through records like some obsessed detective. Maybe you should focus on your own life instead of meddling in ours. But I pressed forward. I focused on my life, and my life is my son, the man sitting right there. I pointed gently to Jason, who sat frozen, his wedding band twisting nervously between his fingers. I will not stand by and watch him become another name on your list. For the first time, Sophia's composure cracked. She straightened in her chair, her eyes flashing with anger. So what if I wanted security? So what if I wanted a marriage that benefited me too? Do you think love alone pays the bills? Jason deserves someone who can manage, someone who won't drag him down. The words hung heavy in the air, cruel and revealing. Jason's jaw clenched as if he'd been struck. My voice softened, but her conviction only deepened. Marriage is built on love, trust, and honesty, not manipulation. And you forget, I did more than just dig into your past. I spoke with a lawyer. Sophia's eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking through her armor. That certificate you so proudly flaunt, the one forged, backdated, and riddled with errors? It makes this so-called marriage legally invalid. You are not Jason's wife. The room erupted, gasps, shocked whispers, people leaning forward in disbelief. Sophia's face burned crimson. She slammed her wine glass onto the table, the stem snapping in her hand. This is ridiculous, you can't prove. But the proof was there, spread out on the table for all to see. Witnesses who could no longer ignore the truth. Jason finally stood, his hands trembling but his voice steady. Sophia, is it true? She said nothing. Her silence screamed louder than any denial. When she finally did speak, her voice was sharp, defensive. Fine, maybe I wanted financial security. Maybe I thought you were easier to control, but don't pretend your life would have been better without me. You needed me. The words cut, but they also freed. Jason shook his head slowly, his eyes glistening. What I needed was honesty, and I see now I never had it with you. Sophia pushed back her chair, her heels clacking sharply against the floor as she stormed toward the door. You'll regret this, she spat, her voice echoing through the stunned silence, and then she was gone. The door slammed shut, and with it, the tension that had gripped the room finally broke. Jason stood still for a long moment before turning to me, his eyes filled with pain but also relief. You saved me, he whispered. I embraced him tightly, my voice trembling but resolute. I didn't save you, Jason. You saved yourself by facing the truth. The room erupted into supportive murmurs, family members surrounding Jason offering comfort, and myself, standing at the center of it all, felt a strange calm wash over me. I have faced betrayal, suspicion, and confrontation, but tonight, I have reclaimed my family's future. And as the guests began to settle again, I lifted my eyes to the camera of memory, to you, the listener of this story, and offered a final reflection. Sometimes love means more than quiet acceptance. Sometimes it means standing up, asking hard questions, and refusing to let lies dictate the future. It means protecting the ones we love even when they don't see the danger themselves. That's what family is about: truth, courage, and love that doesn't bend under pressure.